All right, everyone, welcome back to DA Sports. I'm your host, DASASIN, back for episode number 2. Want to thank everybody who tuned in for episode 1. I greatly appreciate it. This episode, we are going to get into a recap of Thursday Night Football. We'll also talk about some things, some big events going on Saturday, and then, of course, NFL Sunday. So definitely looking forward to it. So let's get the show started. All right, so first off, we got to talk about Thursday Night Football. The biggest thing that's being talked about in regards to the game, of course, is Tua's injury. For those that don't know, that's Tua Tagovailoa. He was concussed towards the end of the game on Thursday Night Football against the Bills. The biggest discussion around it is whether or not Tua should retire. He's now had, I believe, 3 concussions in the last few years. And actually, they said he also had a concussion his last year in Alabama. So I think it's like 4 concussions in the last 5 years, which is definitely not good. Seeing him in the position where his arms are stuck in the air and he was completely out of it, it's not a good look for the NFL. Also, rather ironic that the play happened with him running into Damar Hamlin, which, for those of us that know, Damar Hamlin was the one who was declared basically legally dead on the field 2 years ago in a game against the Cincinnati Bengals. So it's kind of ironic that the person who was out on the field from getting hit in the chest and the person who was out on the field from getting hit in the head had their head collide with the chest to create this concussion situation. Thankfully, Hamlin was perfectly fine, but nobody liked seeing Tua in the way that he was, and there's definitely a lot of concern about whether or not he should continue playing, because they say the more concussions you get, the more likely you are to get more concussions. Now, personally speaking, I believe that if he's medically cleared and he has a desire to continue to play, that he should continue to play. For me, I played football for roughly 14 to 15 years, something like that. I was a defensive player. I played very recklessly. I'm pretty sure in the lifespan of my career, I had concussions. Now, granted, back when I was playing football, concussions weren't really thought of in the same way that they are now. I literally have a teammate that I played with who got a concussion and couldn't uncross his eyes, and they basically smacked him on the helmet to try to fix it, and then he missed like a play or two when he came back into the game. So just to give you perspective of where things have come with concussions. Now, I think that it's great that we have the information that we have now, and there's so much more concern about, player safety around concussions. They have the new helmets, they have the Guardian caps and stuff like that, which I know a lot of people were talking about, that maybe a requirement for Tua coming back would be to make him have to play with one of those Guardian caps on his helmet. I don't know. They also say there's a few different designs that are supposed to be rated even higher than the regular helmets with the Guardian caps. So maybe they force him to have to wear one of those. I don't know. But at the end of the day, when you've been playing football essentially all of your life and you make it to this high of a level, it takes a lot of drive, a lot of work, a lot of effort to get there. He just signed a huge contract. So it's very unlikely, in my mind at least, that he's going to want to just give that all up. Now, granted, obviously, his lifespan is much longer than whatever his playing career is going to be. Even if he goes on to play 10 more years, it's still not even half of his life, hopefully. So yes, there is a concern about his long-term health. But I feel like as long as he can mentally get over the hurdle of being afraid of getting hit or getting injured, because that's one thing. You can't play football timid. I've seen it several times. People who are scared to get hurt, get hurt. So you definitely can't play timid. And if this leads to him feeling like overly anxious in the pocket or overly scared if he has to scramble, then yeah, he definitely should retire because you can't play like that. It's only going to lead to things that are worse. Now, granted, if he does come back and he's medically cleared and then something like this happens again, it might get to a point where they don't even leave it in his hands and they say, look, just from an optics perspective, from a business perspective, we can't keep having this happen, especially because I think almost all of his concussions came in primetime games, which is kind of crazy. So yeah, it's definitely a concern. But I wish him, healthy recovery, a quick recovery, or I guess not necessarily quick, but I hope that he recovers in the time that he needs to recover and that he's able to make a great decision and have a clear mind after talking to medical personnel and the people around him and stuff like that. So as far as the game itself, it was actually shocking. The injury didn't really play into the outcome. The Dolphins were already getting smacked around way before Tua left the game with the injury. Buffalo was actually an underdog going into the game. Miami was 2.5-point favorites. For those that don't know, typically in betting lines, the home team is assumed to receive 3 points just for being at home. So the fact that the line was 2.5 would suggest that Buffalo is slightly favored, but because Miami is at home, they were 2.5-point favorites, and Buffalo is a 2.5-point underdog. Now, it was a short week, Thursday Night Football. Both teams did play the previous Sunday. So that also, in terms of history, typically favors the home team because for the traveling team, it's even a shorter practice window because they have to include travel as part of the weekly planning. But Buffalo's defense was very dominant. They pretty much smacked Miami around from the jump. I know a lot of people who play fantasy football and had Josh Allen. Seeing a 31-10 score, you would think, Josh Allen probably had to do a lot, but he didn't because it was mostly the defense. And as soon as the defense started getting turnovers, I think Buffalo recognized they're like, hey, we got this under control. We'll just run the ball, kind of keep things, the way they are and let our defense continue to make plays. And they did that the entire game. Which was, like I said, a big surprise, especially because for Buffalo, their weakest part of their team going into this year is arguably their secondary, mainly because they lost both of their safeties. They lost their number one corner. And so the strength of the Miami Dolphins is their receiving core. They've got speed all over. They do a lot of things to try to trick people in terms of figuring out where they're going to go. They've kind of revolutionized having pre-snap motion that confuses a lot of defensive schemes and stuff like that. So that's a lot of I think another part of the reason why, Miami was looked at as the team that could probably win this game, but they got demolished. So good job for Buffalo. They are 2-0. Buffalo fans, I'm sure, are excited. I honestly didn't have Buffalo predicted to go to the playoffs this year, so they're at least on track for proving me wrong. But I also say pump the brakes because it's only 2 games. And both of the teams that they beat, the Cardinals and the Dolphins, are teams that I did not have making the playoffs. And I feel like you can't really get a good judge of what a team is going to be unless they beat another good team. So we'll see how it goes the rest of the way, but they're off to a good start. Obviously, you can't complain with being 2-0. That's what everybody strives to get. And as of right now, since they played the first game, they're in first place. So, hey, good for you, Buffalo Bills fans. Outside of Thursday, we have a big weekend coming up. Obviously, there's college football on Saturday. But to be honest, none of those games are really that exciting, I would say. So because of that, I am not even going to bring up any of the college football games. I'm going to talk about the bigger event that's going on Saturday night, which is UFC 306. Okay. Now, UFC 306 is going to be in the Sphere in Las Vegas. It's one of the most captivating arenas in the world. The way they have so much technology in the place. It's going to be apparently a once-in-a-lifetime event where they're going to try to utilize all of the technology in the Sphere with all the LED screens and the technology in the seats. Apparently, Dana White said he's put in $20 million in putting on this event and trying to make it the best that it's supposed to be. It's actually Mexican Independence Day, so the whole card is geared towards, as he stated, a love letter towards Mexico. So a lot of the fighters on the card are from Mexico, And the main event is actually going to be tied into a story that actually has like a professional score to it and everything, where in between fights it's going to be a story of Mexican culture, Mexican fighters, and apparently from the first fight on the main card to the last card is supposed to be the past of Mexican culture and history, and then ending with the last bit of the story right before the main event that's supposed to be like the future of Mexican culture and fighting. So should be a great experience. I'm definitely looking forward to watching it, the entire card. Speaking of the entire card, I'm going to give you two fighters that you should really look into watching that are on the prelims. The first one I'm going to bring up is Raul Rosas Jr. Believe he's opening the entire event. He's actually the heaviest favorite on the entire card. I believe right now he's at minus 1,000. For those that aren't familiar with betting lines, that means you have to bet $1,000 to win $100. So for casual bettors, it's probably not a good idea unless you've got a huge chunk of money. But if you do, I would say it's pretty close to a lock of a bet. He's a very young fighter, so they typically aren't in their prime until like the end of your 20s. They typically say that most UFC fighters hit their prime around 27, 28. He, I believe, is in his early 20s right now, and he became into the UFC, I believe, when he was like 19 or 20. But he's a very aggressive fighter, very heavy grappling, wrestling technique, likes to get really close to his fighters and take them down, ground and pound, and finish the fight. And I believe he's going to do the same thing in this fight. So definitely a fight you should be tuned into and looking forward to. Another fight on the prelims that I think will be interesting to watch, very exciting fighter, Ignacio Bahamondes. Yes, Bahamondes. Sometimes I mess up the pronunciation, so I just want to check my notes to make sure I was saying that right. But he is a very lengthy fighter. He's 6'3", fights in the 155 weight class. So he generally has a height and length advantage on his opponents. He's a stand-up striker. He uses his kicks for good range and his punches. He's actually the underdog in this fight. I believe right now he's at plus 110, which means that if you bet $100 on him to win and he does, you get $110 back on top of your 100. So as an underdog, it's a great bet. I think he will have a good shot at pulling off the upset. The main reason why he's the underdog in this fight is because his opponent, Miguel Torres, does a lot of takedowns. He's a heavy, like, wrestle grappler type fighter. And typically the shorter fighter who has a wrestling background has an advantage against a really lengthy tall fighter because there's more space for them to make their entries and take the person down to the ground, which is probably why Torres is favored in this fight. But I'm looking forward to Bahamondes. I think he's going to do some great striking and maybe even end the fight early. So definitely another fighter you should tune into early on the UFC 306 prelims. Now, as for the main event, there are three main fights at the end of the event. These are the ones that essentially built the card in itself. And so I'm going to go through each one, give you my feedback on it. The first one, which is the third to last fight, is Brian Ortega versus Diego Lopez. Now, personally, I'm rooting for Brian Ortega. Brian Ortega is a Southern California native, just like I am. He goes by the nickname T-City. And, you know, I really like his fighting style and personality. So I'm kind of hoping that he wins. He's not the favorite. He's actually the underdog. Right now, be the last line. He was, I believe he was plus 135. And I think Diego Lopez was at minus 190. So Diego Lopez is the younger fighter, very aggressive. And to be honest, even though I'm rooting for Ortega, I think Lopez probably gets the win. It's actually funny. My wife often watches UFC events with me, and she always says that if somebody has a crazy haircut, they're likely going to get the win. And Diego definitely has a crazy haircut. He has like a mohawk mullet kind of thing. It's pretty wild, but he's a great fighter, very aggressive. Like I said, I think it'll make for an exciting fight. I think Lopez probably gets the win, but I'm hoping I'm wrong in that regards. Now, in the co-main event is Alexa Grasso versus Valentina Shevchenko. Now, for those who aren't very familiar with UFC, Shevchenko was the champion at the 125 weight class for seemingly forever. She was destroying everybody that came up and tried to challenge her for the belt. She's a very well-rounded fighter, strong kicks, strong punches, good takedown defense, good takedowns, and everybody that they sent her way, she would destroy them until she ran into Alexa Grasso, who made her way up the ranks and then defeated her in a big upset, even though it wasn't an upset for me because I actually picked Grasso to win that first fight. Grasso is one of the fighters that I had picked early on in her career that I said eventually would become a champion. I've had a good run in picking out fighters like that. Just to name a few, John Jones. I saw John Jones way early in his career, and I was like, I think he's going to be a champion. Same thing with Israel Adesanya. After seeing his first fight, he was one that I said that I think will eventually be a champion. Same thing with Rose Namajunas. And speaking of which, the next person that I think will be in that same class is Natalia Silva, who just won a fight last week. So Alexa Grasso is somebody that I was on early, and I think that going into this third fight, this is actually the first time she's favored. I believe she's at minus 135. From a betting standpoint, I probably would bet on Shevchenko because I think the fight is going to be so close. And Shevchenko is plus 115, which you pretty much never get a plus money on betting on Shevchenko. But because of, like I said, how I picked out Grasso from years ago, I'm still going to root for Grasso to win and retain the title against Shevchenko. As far as the main event is Sean O'Malley versus Merab Dvalishvili. Now, this is a huge matchup. Merab actually, there's a background story because Merab is good friends with Aljamain Sterling, who used to be the champ in this weight class until he got knocked out by Sean O'Malley. Now, Sean O'Malley is probably the most exciting fighter in today's UFC. He's essentially replaced Conor McGregor. He's very boisterous, talks a good game. He fights very exciting. He gets knockouts and, always colors his hair. Very well branded fighter, and he made his way up through the ranks through a UFC contender series. So from a UFC perspective and a business perspective, I think it'd be great if Sean O'Malley got the win because I think it'll be great for their bottom line. I think it'll kind of elevate him into another level of stardom. And I think that's what most people are probably predicting, which is why right now O'Malley is a favorite. But when the fight was first announced, Merab was actually the favorite betting, and now he's at plus 115. I actually think Merab gets the upset win. I just believe he's a pressure fighter, and I believe over the course of 5 rounds, he's going to find a way to kind of take Sean O'Malley down and keep him down and do damage and end up winning a decision. So that's when I say I think Merab gets the win. But like I said, I would be ecstatic if Sean O'Malley gets the win because, like I said, I think it'll boost his career going forward. So that's it for Saturday. Now, as far as Sunday goes, what I'm usually going to do in this episode before Sunday's picks, I'm going to give you 3 picks that 3 teams that I choose to win, not concerning the spread, just 3 games that I'm picking where I'm going to pick the winners. Then 1 team that I'm going to pick as a lock, and then 1 team that I'm going to pick as an underdog bet. Like, they're not favored to win, but on a long shot bet, I think that they have the best chance to win. So in regards to that, going into NFL Sunday, the first game that I'm going to pick is the Kansas City Chiefs. Obviously, you see I got my Chiefs hat here. And I mentioned in the last episode that I am a Chiefs fan. But this is not a biased pick. I actually think the Chiefs will beat the Cincinnati Bengals. I think the way the Bengals looked in Week 1 against the Patriots is kind of troublesome. They didn't show that they had a potent offense, and in order to beat the Chiefs, you got to be able to score. T. Higgins is still injured, so he won't be playing, so I think the Chiefs will have a lot of success, and the Bengals just won't be able to score enough to keep up. The second game I'm picking is the LA Rams to beat the Arizona Cardinals. The Rams are actually underdogs. They're 1-point underdogs on the road in Arizona. Both teams lost their first game, but Arizona actually was winning late and arguably should have won the game against Buffalo had Kyler Murray not missed Marvin Harrison Jr. towards the end of the game. But With that being said, I think the Rams are just a better overall team. I think they'll be able to run the ball well, and I think Cooper Kupp is going to go bonkers. Even with Puka Nacua not being out, I think the Rams will still be able to execute in the pass game. I think Demarcus Robinson is actually going to step up big this game, and I think the Rams will go into Arizona and get the win. And the third game that I'm picking is the San Francisco 49ers to beat the Minnesota Vikings. San Francisco looked very dominant. Even though Christian McCaffrey is still going to be out again this week, I still think Mason is going to have a huge day. And I think he'll probably run for another 100 yards plus, and San Francisco will get the win. Now, in terms of my lock of the week, I'm going with the Baltimore Ravens beating the Las Vegas Raiders. I think the Raiders aren't a good team. I think they showed that last week, and even though both teams are 0-1, I think the Ravens will probably beat the Raiders by double digits, and especially since they're at home, the game probably won't even be close. So that's my lock of the week. Now, my underdog pick of the week. It's going to upset some people, okay? This team had a dominant performance in week 1, so you're probably thinking, like, why would they be the underdog? Well, it's because they're playing the Dallas Cowboys. That's right. I'm picking the New Orleans Saints to beat the Dallas Cowboys this week. It is, like I said, an underdog pick. It's plus 225, meaning that if you bet $100 for the Saints to win, you'd win $225 on top of that. Now, it makes sense for the Cowboys to be favored. They're America's team. They had a dominant win in week 1 against Cleveland. They pretty much owned the entire game. But I do believe that New Orleans has a better defense, even though Cleveland is renowned for their defense. I think New Orleans' defense is actually better. And I think their offense is way better than Cleveland's. And so that's going to pose a challenge for the Cowboys. And even though I wouldn't be surprised if the Cowboys win, I think this is the one huge underdog that I think has a good chance of pulling the upset. The line right now is 6. So, yeah, New Orleans plus 6 or New Orleans money line would be my underdog pick of the week. So that's it for this week in episode 2. Thank you guys for tuning in, and please be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll keep this thing going. Thanks again. See you next week.